Are you looking for an experience that will grow your teenagers' faith, increase their leadership skills, and teach them the discernment to engage with the world all around them, all while taking them on the adventure of a lifetime? I mean, who isn't looking for that? If your teenager loves fun, adventure, and wants to grow in their faith and leadership this summer, then send them to Excel's Summer Leadership Camp. Excel's Summer Leadership Camp is a 12-day experience for passionate young leaders looking to discover God's truth, to discern wisely, and live wholeheartedly. Your teenager will embark on a transformative journey in the Blue Ridge Mountains, where they'll build lasting friendships in the context of community, embark on thrilling adventures like camping, rock climbing, whitewater rafting, and they will receive expert training and certifications in categories like CPR and wilderness first aid. Each aspect of the camp is woven together to help them learn to discover truth, to discern wisely, and take godly action in the context of real-life situations. To learn more or begin an application, go to theexcelcamp.org. That's theexcelcamp.org. Hurry, because summer is just around the corner.
There's such a disconnect between what we read in the New Testament, especially, and people's experience of church today. And, people kind of tend to write it off as contextualization or, whatever reason people want to give. And I kind of refuse to believe that.
Welcome to the Reclamation Podcast, where our goal is to help busy people reclaim good practices for faith and life. Here's your host, Tony Meltenberger.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Reclamation Podcast. I'm Tony, and I'm excited to bring you this conversation about how to balance faith and life. And today we're going to take a unique perspective by looking at the essence of community as it pertains to faith, life, and your walk with Christ. And I'm here with two brothers of mine, Stephen and Casey. What's up, guys? How's it going?
What is up? Hey, Tony.
Hey, Tony. Glad to be here with you, man.
Good. So, hey, why don't you guys kind of give everyone a little bit of your story and tell us about how, kind of where you guys are in the Reader's Digest version. Stephen, why don't you go first and kind of give us a rundown?
Yeah, absolutely. So I, church-wise, grew up in the United Methodist Church, kind of all we knew. We were at church every time the doors were open. My parents served on every committee possible, Sunday school, vacation Bible school, kids choir, youth choir, all that good stuff. However, it wasn't until I was about 14 or 15 years old when I was discipled really well by a couple of Young Life guys, when I actually started following Jesus and understood what that meant, and kind of surrendered my life to him. From there, a couple years later, started feeling a call into the ministry. There was no burning bush moment or anything like that. It was just kind of when I felt like, when I thought about being in ministry, I kind of came alive inside. And when I thought about doing anything else, there was kind of an emptiness that I felt inside. So that's kind of how I felt called, and went the kind of the typical route. Graduated from Duke Seminary, served as a associate pastor for about 6 years, and then from there went and served a church as a senior pastor for about a year, and then I went to a particularly large Methodist church, and after I did that, went there to start a modern venue there at some kind of an experiment they wanted to try, and so I did that for about 5 years, and that kind of gets us to where Casey and I met. And after a couple of years of discernment and friendship with him, we decided to try to do something together and start something new.
Yeah, and now, how many kids do you have, Stephen?
We've got three. So 3 kids. They're 8, 6, and 3. 2 boys and a girl.
And how long have you been married?
Yeah, met my wife in undergrad.
So she survived the seminary years.
Married about. She did. Yeah, we weren't. We got married. I graduated in May. That was the month in which I graduated. We got married in June, and I started my first appointment in July of that summer.
I gotta love those Methodists, man.
So that was about 12 years ago. Well, that's right, man. It's all about the method. You know that.
Casey, what about you, brother? Give us your kind of story. It's similar, but yet also a little different.
Yeah, for sure, man. Similar in that we ended in the same spot. Different in that how we got there was completely different. from upstate New York, had no kind of Christian background up until the age of 15, where my mom came to know Christ in a pretty dramatic fashion. The family started going to church. That
Now, when you
began
say dramatic fashion, is that like altar call, kind of like, what's dramatic fashion mean?
That's like dead on the operating table, near death experience, outer body experience, like too much to go into. I'm not trying to freak anybody out.
Right.
But that's what happened. So she came home and she was different. Months later, invited us to church, and that started the journey towards Jesus. But I didn't come to faith fully and surrendered my life until I was 21. So well through college, halfway through senior year, already kind of had a trajectory. I was an accounting major and had a job lined up with GE Capital. So I was going into the corporate world, which I was super excited to go and change the world by making lots of money. So I did that, went to work for GE Capital in Connecticut, where I met my wife and we got married, found a great church, was discipled by a couple individuals in kind of different aspects of my life. And they kind of walked me through engagement and then marriage. Almost went to overseas to Kosovo as a missionary at one point.
Oh, wow.
Ended up moving to Scottsdale, Arizona, had our first kid. And all along the way, kind of as I'm inching my way up this ladder through GE, just different opportunities for ministry. So some large churches in Connecticut, a big church in Scottsdale, Arizona, where I got to do youth ministry and worship leading and small group leading and prayer ministry, and then ultimately discipling a handful of guys through the time that I was there. Moved back to Connecticut for a little stint, and then ended up in Charlotte 7 years ago. And about 3 years into that time, transitioned out of corporate America into full-time vocational ministry, working for a pretty traditional Methodist church. They had asked me to lead and start a new venue, very similar to Stephen. So this is where our paths started to converge. And so I got to know Stephen because he was doing something similar to what I was doing on the other side of town. We became friends and family friends. And over the past couple of years, just started to discern a call to start something new together.
And how many kids do you have? I
have 4 beautiful children between the ages of 3 and 8.
God bless.
He has, and that's enough.
That's enough. And how long have you been married?
I've been married 10 years, was last September. So we're coming up on 11 this year. So
you guys are both managing really decent sized families, church planning, all the stuff. Tell me a little bit about your guys' setup in terms of how your organization is set up, because I think it's a little different than most, and it's kind of intriguing because you guys kind of run a partnership, right?
Yeah, you could look at it like that. So Stephen and I set out at the beginning to start this church. We didn't know exactly how it was going to roll out, but through the help of a third-party consultant who did a lot of analysis on who Stephen and I were, our strengths, our weaknesses, we realized we both had capacity to lead, but realized that our gift sets and natural inclinations and personalities were just very, very different. And so that was naturally going to lead to certain roles and things that we were both kind of better at. And we've kind of worked our way through that over the last year, which has been really cool because in this 2x2 mindset that Jesus sent his disciples out in that first time, I think there's something to that. And we see a lot of partnerships in the New Testament and the journeys that Paul goes on because this is tough, man. Like any sole proprietor of church or church organization, man, there's so many pitfalls to that I just see and probably would have experienced had not this been a partnership with Stephen, because every joy is doubled, every hardship or challenge is halved. Every time we face a difficult scenario situation, we get to kind of come together, pray, discuss, process, and we both process things so differently. It's been just really healthy to see that. And from an ego perspective, just being as transparent as possible, I could imagine that if you were just the solo guy or gal, if things start to go well, you start to look at yourself and go, look what I made, like, look what I did. And through this, there's just mutual accountability. There's mutual sharing of the joy together. So it's a God celebration versus a Casey celebration or a Stephen celebration. So that's been really helpful.
Stephen, what are your thoughts on kind of how this has all come together in terms of the partnership and the way you guys are doing working together?
Yeah, I think that work that we did at the very beginning before we even got started, and taking some assessments, working with a consultant to review results of those assessments, that was really invaluable. I think it was kind of God's grace at the beginning. And there's one of the things that Casey and I say regularly is that, I never really do anything that surprises him, whether he agrees with it or not, or anything I say. And he never really does anything that surprises me or says anything that surprises me, just because we took some time on the front end to get to know each other so well, how we're wired, what kind of environments we work best in, some of those really important things that can help to relieve the tension later down the road. And then we really just had a burden to reach our city. I mean, we have great affection for the city in which we live. We were pretty tired of the complexity in the local church. That's something that for me started many years ago. I mean, just as you read through the story of God, there's such a disconnect between what we read in the New Testament, especially, and people's experience of church today. And, people kind of tend to write it off as contextualization or, whatever reason people want to give. And I kind of refuse to believe that. I thought that it could be, people could experience church more similarly to how we read about it in the New Testament than what most people do these days, at least in the American church.
Yeah, it's great. And the fact that you guys were able to kind of come together and do this, we often talk a lot about faith and balance on this podcast. And one of the things that intrigues me about this idea is that it can be so lonely at the top. But when you've got a built-in partner whose mission is, basically mission driven like you are, do you find, you guys have both led congregations. Do you find that this is less lonely, I guess?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. We joke about how we even quit to each other on basis, like what to echo what Casey was saying earlier, like we always have each other there to support, and we both are going to feel every movement of this journey more so than anybody else within the organization. So to have somebody to share that with has been enormous.
Now, Casey, what's been your guys' rhythm of prayer and walking with God together? Because I would imagine that as a partnership, and we see this all the time in marriages, and you guys kind of are work husbands. Too much. Okay, that's too much.
Just enough.
How do you guys manage that relationship of?
You're not the first one.
And I'm sure I won't be the last.
Including our wives.
How do you guys manage
right.
that, staying both connected to God in that process?
Yeah. So for me, I think we started to do some things accidentally in the beginning that I think set a really good trajectory. And one of those things was just prayer. And not prayer like, hey man, I'm praying for you, or hey, like, yeah, let's go pray about this and come back together. Like I remember times like in parking lots, in cars, like feeling overwhelmed, trying to sift through like what the call of God was on us. And we'd be like, oh, let's stop right now and let's pray together. And that just carried through to the rhythm of even like how we set up a week and when we're at our best, and block scheduling, or you've probably talked about it before. You set apart certain times, and when we're at our best, we have at least 2 touch points in the week on mornings where we'll do a rundown of the week and start in prayer. And there are sometimes
like Monday, Tuesday, or is it more spread out than that? Let's get tactile with it.
Yeah. So it's Monday mornings and usually Wednesday mornings. Like I said, when we're at our best, Mondays for sure. And then Wednesdays, I would say 60% of the time, 50% of the time. And then regular times of that, like when we're with people, it will not be strange for us to pause to, whether it's someone departing to go on a mission trip or someone going out of town or dropping somebody off. Just the other day we're in a parking lot. Like our rhythm of prayer is, let's not wait until we're in our prayer closets. Let's just pray now. And I think that's something God just put in both of us, that we're just very comfortable to move into that. So we have the staples and moments that we're doing that. And then we have the communal times. Like we started the 2018 with prayer nights every other week. So this is 7:00. We get together on Friday, and we go until 9:15, 9:30, depending on kind of what's going on. And that's worship, and that's prayer, and that's out loud, and that's, over people and different things. So I think this bedrock of prayer has not just been like an ethereal thought. It's been something that we've just baked into our calendars, our schedules, and our rhythms.
Now, have both of you guys been in churches that had done prayer nights like that before, or is this something that God kind of placed on both your guys' heart as you are planting this new community?
Steven, why don't you answer that first?
I can't say that I have been a part of churches before where I think, and not to be disrespectful of any churches where I've served in the past, but I think prayer was a bit obligatory rather than an intentional focus. So it's not that people didn't pray, but it was a bit ritualistic. And so, but yet I would, again, go visit other churches, sometimes in other parts of the world, places like North Africa, Central America, and the emphasis on prayer was just different in those areas and in those churches. And, I kind of developed a hunger for something like that within me than what I was typically experiencing in church here.
That's great. How do you guys keep your church hungry for prayer? How do you guys promote that culture, Casey?
Yeah, you can't. At least that's what I'm finding. Like you can't force, you can't push, you can only display, speak to and celebrate, and then posture yourself before the Lord and just like ask, like, Lord, give us hunger and thirst for you. Give us a longing for that. So it's interesting. There are some folks in our community, like when we have our prayer nights, we have like a core of probably 6 to 12 people that are just always there. And you just know that's a part of their being. That's a part of who they are. And then there's some other folks that you talk to, and it's kind of this, oh yeah, I meant to be there. I meant to do it, but I couldn't, and then you get to talk to them behind a closed door, and it's like, yeah, man, like, what are you guys doing there for 2 hours? And so
listen, I like to pray, but 2 hours seems like a long time. Yeah. Does it go fast?
Yeah. It does, man. It goes. I mean, yeah, some nights it's tough. Some nights you're just waiting on the Lord to do something, say something, move in a certain way, like explode. And other nights, I mean, we had a prayer night a month or so ago where there was probably 6 of us, and I'll tell you, it was like heaven had come to earth for an hour and a half. And we looked up and we're like, dude, it's 9:00 already. Holy cow!
That's awesome.
And that's not every time. Like, there's no magical potion, and there's no voodoo that makes this happen. It's just, I think when people come hungry, there's just something special that gets stirred up in the spiritual places. So the more we celebrate that, the more we model that, the more we teach and lead people inside of their communities to do this on their own, then it becomes much less mystified and more just like, yes, this is what is necessary for us to see revival take place.
I think you're on mute.
Workday starting to sound the same?
I think you're on mute.
Find something that sounds better for your career on LinkedIn. With LinkedIn Job Collections, you can browse curated collections by relevant industries and benefits, like flex PTO or hybrid workplaces, so you can find the right job for you. Get started at linkedin.com/jobs. Finding where you fit. LinkedIn knows how.
Yeah, one of the themes that I've been hearing a lot from people lately is this intentionality and practices that we want to promote. You guys are a disciple-making church with an emphasis on community. Steven, can you kind of tell us a little bit about what that means and looks like in the context of your community? I mean, all the intentional community that I've heard you guys talk about. What does that look like if I'm coming to your church for the first time, my wife and 3 kids? Where are you putting me?
Yeah. So at the core of our church is one-on-one discipling relationships. So that's one believer guiding another believer along in the ways of following Jesus. We use the word obedience a lot, that when we look at the commands of Jesus and what Jesus as Lord has commanded us to do, what does our obedience to those commands look like, and how do we help each other to be obedient, to hold each other accountable? And so that comes from, for me and for Casey, our greatest seasons of transformation in our faith journey have been when we were intentionally discipled, kind of one-on-one. So we said, what would it be like to create a church culture around that? And then outside, the next layer beyond the one-on-one discipling relationships are what we call devoted communities. And these are groups of 6 to 8 people plus kids. And they get together 2 to 3 times per week, ideally. We call them touch points. So to have 2 to 3 touch points a week, a touch point can be that group getting together and having dinner. It can be that group getting together and having some discussion around scripture, what they're reading together. It can be some discussion around what the message was from our gathering on Sunday morning. It can be going to the pool. It can be going to the park, going to the movies. We say what we're trying to do is raise people to the level of family. You know, if Tony, as we sit here and we talk, if I get a phone call and it's my wife or a child, then I'm going to say, hey, I got to take this. I got to go, right? What would it look like to raise, 4 to 6 other adults to that level where you are devoted to one another as family? And we got that straight from Acts 2:42 to 47. Yeah. And it says, where the believers there they were devoted to one another. They were devoted to fellowship, devoted to prayer, devoted to the apostles' teaching and the breaking of bread. So we said, well, what if we just did that? And it's been amazing. Obviously we've had to have some people reorient their lives around that kind of a commitment to one another, which is very abnormal in our wealthy suburban context. But for those that have made it priority, it's been amazing. And I've been surprised at how much people have, how much devotion they've shown to one another in all of it.
But I mean, when I think about what the trends that we see around the United States right now, one of them is to do all these like Spartan races and kind of raise the bar. And I think in this model, you guys have raised the bar. You guys have kind of went Spartan mode on the churches, which I really like. Casey, how is this
Spartan
idea of
church, man?
Spartan church? I think you guys, I'll buy that shirt. Casey, how's this kind of impacted your life? I mean, and you've got little kids and a wonderful wife, how's this changed you guys?
So this past year or 13 months has been what Stephen and I have written about and talked about a lot, like a journey towards clarity, which is not what anyone wants to hear that's looking to start something new. So that's a journey to clarity for Stephen and I. That's a journey of clarity for me and my wife, journey of clarity for me and my family, and for all the families that have decided to jump on board. So individually, and what we're seeing from a holistic standpoint is people walking into a community where they can't hide. And that sounds like kind of mischievous and conniving, but at the same time, like, I think that's what the family of the church, the body of believers, was supposed to be, a place where you shouldn't hide, you shouldn't want to hide. And therefore, either you lean into it like a Spartan race, or you run away from it because it scares the crap out of you. And so for my family and for me and my wife, and as we are raising these kids and speaking these things out over community and then going home, like, I've seen a almost 1-to-1 correlation between me as an individual walking in step with this vision, and my kids and my wife beginning to walk in step with this vision. Specifically my wife, like, I can brag on her for a bit. Like, I've just seen such tremendous growth in her, such tremendous excitement about what God's doing, really leaning into the ways of Jesus in her individual life and how she interacts with the community around her, and just a desire in her to see others come to know Jesus in intimate, specific ways, which, not to say she didn't have that before, but the intentionality with which we're now living our lives, like, we have people over at our house, I kid you not, 4 nights a week. Like, it would be rare for you to come over and visit for a week and not see at least 3 or 4 families. And that's not like braggy. That's like sacrifice. That's my wife, who works really hard, does, mommying all day, every day for 4 kids, has a cake pop business on the side, is an amazing wife, but then also hosting all these people. So it's come at a sacrifice, but she's leaning in and going, this is amazing, and this is what we think God wants. So for me personally, this has just been like an incredible year. Incredible just to see what God's doing in us.
Now, Stephen, does it look the same at your house as well? Are you guys having people over 3-4 nights a week? Is that part of your balance?
Yeah, I'm not sure that it's 3 or 4 times a week. But
Casey's like the strongest extrovert I've ever met in my life.
Yeah, Casey.
You love it.
he doesn't really know what to do with himself if he doesn't have a large group to hang out around at all times, 24/7. I'm kind of the other end of the spectrum, which is just one of the ways in which we are almost entirely opposite from one another. And so, but for me and my wife, we're both similar in that, and for us, it's really pushed us. What does it look like to be obedient to Jesus as far as hospitality for us? What does it look like for us to open up some space, to make some room for some people in our lives who we wouldn't normally? And I've been impressed with my wife as well to see her really step into that and really be intentional to try to speak into the lives of some other women in particular in our neighborhood who she probably wouldn't otherwise. So it's pushed us, it's challenged us, and for the good.
It's incredible, guys. I love the way that you're kind of really highlighting the balance in the relationships and then balance in the community and how that all comes together. If you guys were going to look back at your Christian life, what would you tell your younger selves that you now know? Stephen, why don't we start with you? What would you look back and say, Stephen, as you're getting ready to go into seminary or just coming out of seminary, this is what you need to know about your walk? Or what advice would you give yourself?
Yeah, what a great question. I think I would tell myself that God is sovereign. And so, as much as we can try to follow Jesus, live into the ways of Jesus, be obedient to the commands of Jesus, at the end of the day, God is sovereign, and we have to appreciate his plan, his time, and not try to force things. That's one of the, for me, especially in this most recent journey, I just decided I wasn't going to force things. I wasn't going to force things when it came to my leadership. I wasn't going to force things when it came to my faith. And a huge relief, my faith is deepened in the sense that I'm just no longer forcing things. If I start to move a particular direction and I feel like the Lord's not in that, then I stop and I wait. And I pursue him and ask him where to go and when to go. And that's okay.
That's awesome. Casey, same question to you. What would you look back and kind of your journey and tell your younger self?
Yeah, I think my younger self transitioning into full-time vocational ministry, there was a moment and a long moment, a season where I felt I had to play catch up, right? I was an accounting major that went into GE Capital, worked for, corporate America for almost 10 years. And now I'm transitioning into this new role, and I'm looking around me seeing, all the same guys you see on podcasts and magazines. And I'm like, well, in the corporate world, in the mindset I had, I wanted to be the CEO of the company. That was my mindset. That was where I was going. That's what I wanted to do. So trying to translate those two things of so to be successful based on what everyone seems to be holding in high esteem, it means I have to be them. And what was a long, unfortunate battle was realizing I'm not them. I don't function the same way. I don't think the same way. So the advice I would be giving myself at that transition point is look, who you are, this unique Casey that's, crazy and off the wall and does things before he really thinks about them and, isn't always so structured and organized, but somehow pulls things off ever so often. That guy's okay. He can do ministry too. It's going to be different from maybe what you see, held in high esteem, but you can still be effective, and that this God-given heart for people is actually your greatest asset. Not your preaching, not your teaching, not your organizational stuff. How you and when you love people well, that's going to be your greatest asset, and lean into that. That's probably where I would have started.
And I think that's so true for so many of us that we get caught in the skills and not necessarily just the foundation of it all, which is that love and how you love other people. So that's really incredible. Do you guys feel like that your church is balanced in kind of its walk? I mean, you guys are kind of doing a different type of church in the sense that it's intentionally building disciples, which sounds so weird because it feels like every church should be doing that. That's, if you're going to look at Matthew 28, but in terms of the way you guys look, it looks different. Does that offset you guys at all, Casey?
Yeah, I think when we get to that balance thing, besides a monthly prayer night and a couple opportunities here or there to serve our community, we have intentionally removed any obligatory things that people need to spend time on for the corporate structure of the church, other than setting up, for 50 minutes on a Sunday, and that's every 5 weeks. Other than that, we are attempting to remove any and all programmatic approaches to basically say, here's your life. Here's how Christ has made you. Like, go be Christ in those places, not here. Like, come here and celebrate what God's doing, but like, go. And I think that throws church people, like in quotations, you can't see it if you're listening, it's like throws church people for a loop, because they're like, no, I want to get involved. Like, I want to get involved. And we're like, right. Cool. Get involved in those people's lives. Get involved in those people's lives. Like, invest and invite people into your life, and then see what God does. And there's a massive disconnect, because if they've come from maybe a more traditional model, as you speak, our approach is a little bit different. If they come from a different approach, their only point of reference is, no, how I get involved or how I get in is by volunteering to do this, this, and this. And we've removed all that. So those old normal on-ramps are no longer there. So life ends up being the program.
That's awesome.
Which messes people up.
I love that. I love actually throwing people off balance a little bit that way, and making people say no to stuff so they can say yes to living out the disciple-making vision.
Stephen, did I do that justice, or am I missing any piece of that in terms of balance of our community?
Yeah, no, I think you pretty much nailed it. One of the questions that we ask regularly in our community is, who are 3 people close to you but far from God, or you're praying for on a regular basis? And it's funny, because we actually tell our people, don't invite people to church, invite them into your lives, and see what the Lord can do through those relationships. So we want people in each other's homes, really more so than we really want them to gather together communally, all as one group on the weekend at the gathering. If we can have people in each other's homes on a regular basis, praying for each other, showing devotion to one another, and then inviting others who are close to them but far from God into that kind of community, and just seeing what the Lord does with that.
I love it. And I love you guys. I love your heart for disciple making. Any closing thoughts on this balance of faith and life and what it looks like?
If you figured it out, let me know, man.
Yeah, I think what I'm learning is that it's like the balance is that faith kind of is life, and that's what you guys are saying, right? Casey, closing thoughts?
Yeah, I think Eugene Peterson, when he was making his interpretations of Jesus' line about like, my yoke is easy, like, come to me all who are heavy laden, and I don't know the exact verbiage, people can look it up, but basically he says, like, put down the yoke of religiosity and all that garbage, and like, come over here and I'll show you what life actually is. And I think there's something to what we're trying and what we're leaning into and starting to experience, which is like, stop doing a bunch of things and just start being, and see what God can do, because it's uncomfortable. You're exposed. It requires a level of authenticity that the world isn't really like hyping up. But I think there's something to what Jesus is welcoming us into, which is, don't segment, don't bifurcate, but just be. And as you do that, you find that life is abundant, even when it's messy. So that's what we're trying to do.
Now, gentlemen, if somebody wants to learn more about Multiply Church, about what you're doing, if they're like, I need this in my life, what's the best way for them to get in contact with you, Casey?
I think the best way
multiplychurch.com.
Multiply Church. They were not ready for that question. Yeah. I threw them off.
Yeah, multiplychurch.com.
Great. Well, hey guys, thank you so much for your willingness to be open and to share about what God's doing. I absolutely love it, and appreciate you guys.
Thanks, Tony. Appreciate you too, man.
Thanks, Tony. Love you, brother.
Like what you heard? Please take a minute to rate and share so others like you can find good practices for faith and life.